because he apparently stole her tip. There was a $1 coin. Like
$1 coin? You stole her toonie?
Yeah.
No, it was her loonie. The toonie's the $2 coin, dude.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah, come on. Everybody knows.
So we get kicked out
Are
of
we
the bar.
started? Yeah. We're running. Yep. 15, 16, 17. All right. We're good. Don't worry. No rush. No worries. We're good. Plus, it's always makes it more fun. So loonies versus toonies. Big debate.
Oh, yeah.
Big debate. I've seen some people do some things with loonies that quite remarkable.
Can't be mentioned on the podcast.
Yeah, well, probably not. But I saw it happen. It's Canada. Anything can happen in Canada. That's the number one rule. Why'd you start the podcast, man? When did you start podcasting?
So I started Like a Champion in 2021. It was still kind of in COVID hangover.
Yeah.
And I just realized that I really love to hear people's stories.
Mm-hmm.
It was really that simple, and been fortunate enough to been around South Florida for basically my whole life.
So I would call that unfortunate, but yes.
Hey, you got to take the good with the bad.
Yeah,
but they made Miami Vice down here. They didn't make it in Connecticut.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't live in Connecticut either. I've really lived there. But yeah, when I came to Miami in '98, I left as soon as I graduated. Like I went from graduation to the airport and left and didn't. It took like 18 years to come back.
Yeah,
I was like, I'm never going back to South Florida.
It's
the people. There's people here. They're intolerable sometimes.
Yeah, well, nobody's really from here.
Right.
Like we're one of the few ones that are actually, I'm in third generation here. So, but the podcast was something where we were, I was trying to find something to do with my time where I could, really tell these stories. And so we did it on Zoom originally. And it was super low budget. I had a guy edit it and do a little this and that. But I interviewed some great guys, Danny Canal and Elio Castroneves and, some local heroes, so to speak. And it was, I really did it because I was inspired by a book called Tools of the Titans by Tim Ferriss.
Okay.
And so Tim Ferriss is a famous author, podcaster, and Tools of the Titans was an excerpt of all of his great interviews. And I loved it. It was kind of Reader's Digest, best of the best. And he interviewed people who were basically experts or champions in their own particular field, whatever that field might be, business, music, acting, science, what have you. And I just love that. And so that's kind of how the podcast was born. But I realized that I wanted to do a longer format so people could really,
dive into the story.
They could tell their story in such a way that you wouldn't be able to hear it on the news.
Right.
Because our society, we're very distracted and, very impatient. And so I stopped doing it just because it got to be a huge amount of my time. And thankfully I got really busy at work. But then the last year and a half I've really spent trying to build my boutique investment banking business to grow. And that involved bringing, people on board that could handle a lot of the tasks that I was, burdened with before. And once I got doing that and setting us up to be able to scale and grow, it was basically, okay, now how do we grow? How do we get more business in the door because we're ready to go? And I talked to a ton of different marketing consultants. And I put proposals out on Upwork and I had people emailing me proposals from Bangladesh, And so long story short, an IT guy that does a lot of work for us brought in our producer and he said, I want to bring your podcast back, but is there, I want to do it in person. Is there a cool place where you think we can do it? And the light bulb went off. And so now we've been at it since August and, we've got 1,250 subscribers on YouTube now and we're off and running. But more importantly, David, is that people are actually talking about it.
Yeah.
And people are coming up to me and saying, oh, I realize what you do now.
Yeah, it's hard to understand what a mergers and acquisitions advisor is, right? Or a boutique investment bank, like what? Or are you a business broker? Or are you this or that? And it allows, it's just I think of it as a medium that allows people to get a better view of you, right? Like they can understand you a little bit better, but also I think it's for me, when I talk to people about why would they do a podcast, it's like, well, most people that come on my show wouldn't answer my phone call without the show.
Oh yeah, sure.
Like
people like to tell their story.
Yeah, they
right?
like to tell their story.
Right.
And so I try to focus on people I'm interested to talk to, right? Like, here's a list of 40 people and I give it to my booker and 4 of them end up on the show and then I fill it in in different ways. But that's really, and like sometimes I'll be like, all right, who from the years 1985 to 1994 what was I interested in as a kid?
Yeah.
And I'll be like, all right, let's go. Like, I like the Wonder Years. Like, let's go find Winnie Cooper. Right. And like, we'll do shit like that. And it turns out Winnie Cooper's like in Tennessee, joined like a religious thing and not really available for interviews, but
well, can't win them all.
Maybe she'll be back in LA soon enough and we'll be able to do it. The other piece is like, all right, well, let's take this on the road a little bit, right? Like we're in New York. That's our home base. We came down here in Florida, South Florida, out in LA, just trying to expand the network. So now you have a tool that allows you to expand your own network. I as a marketing tool, I agree. I think it's one of the better aspects, one of the better ways to spend. It's not cheap. It's not free to do it, but it's also not cost prohibitive if you have an actual business. That's my take, you know?
Yeah. I think, even though there's literally a million of them out there in terms of podcasts, I still think that it still makes you unique, right? I mean, if you're putting out the content that people want to hear, then you're providing a value and you're going to have an audience. And
it's like, again, it's not about the audience size at the end of the day. Who's in your audience?
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, you're putting out the content for the audience that you want to appeal to.
That's right.
Right. Let's say if you want to write a book for yourself. What do you think's interesting? And then write the most interesting book on that topic, right? Don't worry about, what other people are going to think. And same thing with comedy. I've read a lot about that, and it's a super interesting way to look at it and kind of takes the pressure off, right? Just go out there and do it.
For sure. So you're Wes Shelton.
That's me.
It says on your business card, certified mergers and acquisitions advisor.
What does that mean? Is that what you're going to say?
Yeah. What is that? Like,
mergers and acquisitions is just a fancy term for businesses changing hands.
Yeah.
Most of the time, and the work that we're doing is acquisition, disposition, buying and selling businesses. But we're representing the people that are doing that. So we're an intermediary. Some people would call us a broker. I think we provide a lot more of a service than a broker, so more of an investment bank. So if you're somebody who's got a business that's worth $5, $10, $50 million and you're ready to sell, you want to retire, we're the people that you hire to come in and get it ready to sell and take it to market, find the buyer, negotiate the sale.
So is that the market size you specialize in?
Yeah, we would call it lower middle market. So 5 to 50 million in enterprise value. So what that really puts us is,
what's middle market these days? Up to like 500 million or something?
It depends on who you ask. But yeah. So, the business brokers tend to do up to 5 million.
Yeah.
We're 5 to 50, 5 to 100. And then the investment banks kind of dominate, above that level.
Yeah. I've noticed that like in that 100 to 250 or 100 to 500, like there's weird players. Like KPMG has an internal investment bank in that space, right? Now they represent Fortune 100 companies, but like their investment bank is in that particular space. So it's like, all right, what's going on here? And so when I did M&A work, it was back in,
oh, you did?
Yeah. 2000 to 2006. So I did one of the acquisitions I worked on was the Enron. I represented Dynegy as it was acquiring Enron. And
so they were acquiring what, leftover assets?
No, they were acquiring Enron before it went belly up. And so like it was, people knew that it was bad things had happened at that point, but not what had happened. Right. Yeah. And then, so we did a lot. I at that point I was pretty junior in my legal career. So it was like, it was like real due diligence type stuff and ancillary documents.
Oh, so you a lawyer by trade?
Yeah, well, by trade is generous. So I went to University of Miami School of Law.
Oh, okay.
And then went up to New York and started in about 1,000 person firm in New York, which was big at the time. And then
that would be big.
Yeah.
Anytime, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at that time, there were very few that were that consolidated. It was a merger between a New York and a San Francisco firm, one of the first big Law 100 mergers. And then went to a small North Carolina firm for about 3 years, and then mostly practiced on 40 Act advisory stuff, which is pretty boring, but it pays.
So now you're just a hardcore hot dog.
No, I'm not just hot dogs. So then I left and created, did my PhD in business strategy and became a faculty member, then started raising money and then, did a bunch of different things in leadership at the University of Connecticut. And then, became a hardcore fan of hot dogs. So if you're Blake's friend, right, here's the thing. If you're that close to him, you become, in your own orbit, the hot dog guy. So in David Noble's world, I'm the hot dog guy, but only from proximity to Charles.
Yeah.
And so, and he has more names than you could imagine. I don't know who he's hiding from or what he's hiding from, but, Blake, and I've known him since second day of law school, 1998.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, we go that far.
So you go that far, yeah.
And so, so the hot dogs, that just sort of like came into my life. And then other people, because you're close to Blake, other people know you like hot dogs. That's really it. And it just spreads like wildfire. And so,
I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm highly experienced in the world of hot dogs.
You should be,
but I'm hot dog curious.
Yeah. I don't like,
I'm very fair
here.
weather.
I'm hoping they bring in hot dogs. I don't know. But, we did it as an experiment to get out of the studio, right? So the podcast, the whole thing, it's all an experiment to see what you can do and what you can't do. So there's always tests running, that sort of thing. So we moved the hot dog thing out of the studio and said, all right, well, let's go do this and see what happens, right? Like, what are the good? I mean, I don't think this exists without the Worldwide Weenie Tour. So like, this is one of the outputs of it. And so that's a lot of what I'm doing now is human capital investment. So if I had to design the perfect job description for me to explain it to someone down the road, it'd be like, well, I'm a venture capitalist in humans, right? Like I invest in humans. I help them. I create leverage at each point. And if they're starting a business or they're trying to do some creative output or they're trying to, whether it's make a TV show, like we have a production company, we have all of the pieces across the board, a brand lab we can do, like we could stand up coffee cup company tomorrow, right? Like that's where I'm trying to get to is how do I make you that much better at being you? Most people can't take the time to invest in themselves. So how do we help other people invest in themselves? Really? That's the core. And so you got to show up, like showing up's the first rule. And then from there, it's like, I don't want to do 0 to 1s, right? I want to do 1 to 10. Like if you have the base fundamental pieces, I want to invest in making you go from 1 to 10. It's pretty simple, I think. Yeah. And so the podcast was designed to have those conversations and understand what people are working on and what they're doing, et cetera. So that, I think what I've learned from it is like, there's everything you see about people on social or everything you learn in a normal course social interactions, there's a whole layer to people that the podcast starts to dive into that never gets told.
Right.
And I think that's a similar thesis behind Like a Champion is like, you need that longer form to actually probe into what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the art form that is demanded of that, like that role and probably similar to yours is knowing when to drill down further into conversation or when to move it along to the next topic, right? Because I don't go in, we don't have a big pre-interview, anything other than sometimes I'll reach out and say, hey, is there anything off the table? That kind of thing. Sometimes I don't, but it's all more iterative and intuitive and knowing when to like, oh, you just said something. Tell me about your mentor. You said you were talking about your mentor. That was interesting. How did that begin? Would you say that you would be where you were today without this mentor? And then sometimes, it gets to the point where there's like tears in the eyes. Right. And I felt like I'm, Roy Firestone or something, back in the day. But it's fun to explore those conversations for sure.
Is it Is it a passion project at this point, or is it truly a marketing component?
Originally it was a passion project.
Mm-hmm.
It was just that. I just want to talk to people who are great at what they do and have achieved things in their life, and I want to hear how they did it. And I'm hoping that would inspire people. And then when my now producer brought up the idea of bringing it back for marketing purposes, I thought we could have both.
Right.
We can have both. I want to hear these people's story, but we're doing it in such a way that we can sort of bottle it up into the shorter clips and stuff. And it's educational, right? Ultimately, I'm appealing to an audience, and I'm hoping to spread awareness about who I am and what I do and what we do as a company, but also give people a platform to tell their stories and how they got to where they did. And there's a lot of check marks that go on.
Yeah. Do you find a legitimacy impact? Like, oh, well, yeah, you can send people to your podcast. You can send them to Apple Podcasts. You can send them to YouTube. You can send them here. And
there's a QR code on the back of that card that's just like, trying to get people to go there and but yeah, there's a legitimacy to that, I think, because the production value, like what you're doing here, is real. And I think that it's one of those things where it's a reflection of who you are and how you do business and how you treat people and deal with them is how you do things like that. We're doing it in a professional way. The production value, people keep saying, wow, I can't believe like that. It's really set up nicely. And I think it's the same in how you dress. I don't necessarily believe that you have to be the dressiest person, but your shirt's ironed and, things are high and tight. That's a reflection to me and how you do business, right? I know that things are going to be taken care of if you're put together. So I think there's a legitimacy to it there for sure.
Yeah. So like that was where we were like, well, early on, we're like, all right, I'm a confusing person. Like it's hard to follow me. So we knew that was going to be an issue in creating the audience and finding the audience. It would take a while to like we talked about it in terms of 100 episodes. Like we're going to have to create a foundational base that allows a story to evolve. Because if I try to define out the story in the beginning, I'll lose it in like the 8th episode, and I'll just start meandering David Noble style. So my producer is a former student, right? And he was a podcast producer on a number of big podcasts in New York. And he's like, I want to do your podcast. It's going to be hard. Here's a bunch of things. And so I think you have to also learn, you were talking about where do you probe, where do you move on, all that. Like you have to learn all of the craft, but how do you get people to participate at the earliest stage when you're learning? And I think production, if I were giving someone advice, it's invest in production value, because like guests will come on even if you have a low number of followers, low number of subscribers, not a huge reach. If the production value is there for them such that they know something as simple as I can use the social media clip. I look good. The person doesn't make me look stupid or screw up, just like entirely screw up. And I think, that's been sort of the saving grace of what we do and what's allowed us to go and get guests that I would say are way outside of the caliber of what we do, like as you're learning, in the early stages. So, I've seen that evolve. So when you think of your business now, it's the foundation is built and you're working towards growth. Is that the position that you feel you're in? Yeah. I mean, the foundation for doing the work that we do has been there. I've been working for my partner and mentor there for almost 14 years now. It's just that we didn't have a lot of infrastructure in place to grow, to do a lot of deals. So we would, we would do, close when you're selling, when you're selling, you're not working, and when you're working, you're not selling.
100%. And I know that's a vicious cycle that a lot of people, especially smaller consulting like professional firms, go through. And so I just finally decided, hey, I can't be doing, of the 5 tasks I do, I need to find other people to do 3 of them so I can focus on A, going out and getting more business, and B, high level handling the deals that I have and negotiating deals and getting them closed. And, there's a lot of hand holding that goes in what we do, because most of the people that we work for,
it's the first time they've sold a business.
Yeah. They got $10, $20, $30 million businesses. They're a fantastic business, but they've never sold one before.
And that business is probably a significant part of their personal identity.
And their wealth.
And their wealth.
It's totally
and
their names on the door.
And their single asset wealth.
Right.
There's probably no very limited other wealth, right? Their Merrill Lynch is
80-90% of their net worth for most of these lower middle market business owners. And my dad and my uncle were those people too.
Yeah. My mother is one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my sister will be one,
so it's an emotional thing for them too, right? Your name's on the door. You go to a place where you're respected.
And someone's going to change it. Someone's going to cut the corner that you never allowed your name to be cut.
And even if they have these buyers have great ideas, the sellers often aren't going to like it because it's change, right? And it's almost an implication on them, like, well, why would they change? It's working.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, I mean, it's, all their net worth's tied up in the business and all that stuff. So, I forget what we even started with that, but.
Yeah, well, it's all right. It was just talking about, we're just talking, that's always fun. I, dude, the amount of times I get lost in a conversation, but the conversation moves. We were talking about sort of like we were talking about the podcast as a mechanism. And then we moved into, where is your business at in its life cycle, and where was the foundation, right? And so you were talking about simply building out that infrastructure to allow you to grow, which the question that came off of that is not just, we talked about the founder or the owner of the business giving up control, but if you're moving 3 things off your desk that you used to do, nobody's going to ever do that as good as you. And that's a challenge when it's your name on the.
So just to get more granular, if you want to hear. So I used to do all the financial models for us.
Right.
And so when I came in, my partner was doing everything by himself. He's 67, so he's 20 years older than me. He's been my mentor. His name's Dan Smith. And so he got to the point where he was like, he grew up with not a lot. So in his mind, why spend money to have somebody else do it when he can do it himself? Right. I get that. I mean, it's like my granddad grew up during the Great Depression. He died a pretty wealthy guy, and he spent
zero money. Yeah,
it was ingrained in his soul, right? And so when Dan brought me on, it was finally like, hey, I don't have enough hours in the day. Would you be willing to work with me? And I said, yeah. So then I started doing the financial models. I would build the pitch decks, and I did those 2 things better than him, but he did a lot of the things better than me. Well, once we got to the point where I realized I had to outsource and push some of those tasks off because they were just weighing me down too much. Now that the guy I have doing my financial models is better than me.
Yeah.
And I found a guy to build all my pitch decks it's fantastic. He's in Jersey. My analyst is in Brooklyn. They do both those things better than me. For the most part, they're not really client facing.
Right.
So we're not really dilutive in that sense at all. And so it's fantastic. My sister works with me. She's in Dallas. She's doing a lot of the social stuff with the podcast for me and some VA stuff for me. So it's just, we are so much more capable to do more deals, and our pipeline is growing as a result finally. But that's years of work to get where where we are now.
Yeah.
And the podcast is just now starting to, we've doubled our subscribers in literally 2 weeks.
That's good.
And people are saying, I love the stories in your podcast, and people are saying, now I get what you do. And so we're seeing the fruit of all that. And so that's super fun.
What's the first thing you tell someone when they show up and I want to sell my business? What's the first thing you go to?
Why do you want to sell?
Right. So the why.
Oh, that is 100% why. Because sometimes the reason is good and sometimes it's not good.
Right. What's an example of a bad reason?
I'm exhausted. The business is running me into the ground. And usually that's a result of a business that's overly reliant on the owner, which is not a good thing.
Right.
I would call it a fatal flaw in a lot of cases. And sometimes you got to dig because they're not going to really tell you. And, you got to there's got to be a trust factor there. A client's got to be real with you. You can't go into a deal and get retained and engaged and go down the road, and then clients are withholding material facts from you. You went to law school, you know where I'm getting it with this. You can't, that's a bad road, but you've got to understand and hope that the reason is I want to retire, or This is probably a private equity favorite. I think I've grown it to where I can grow it without taking on debt or another partner or some sort of unfavorable, capital stack, right? So it's, I'd like to maybe bring on a partner with capital where I maintain, the ability to continue to run the business, or maybe somebody else like a strategic can buy it and take it. And I've set it up, but I don't want to go in my pocket and borrow a bunch of money
or take the risk.
Office.
Some people are comfortable taking sweat equity risk, right? And they're just not. It goes back to that concept of like, I grew up poor, I don't want to do it. Like, some people just don't want to invest what they've earned back in. And you do see that quite a bit. They don't
see it like house money, right? That's money they've earned.
Yeah, that's it's money that they've already counted in the bank, right? Yeah. And so, I definitely and that makes sense, because now you're looking now you can look at the proper set of buyers, right? I mean, I think that's where.
I mean, take my dad and my uncle. They were multi-location, new franchise car dealers, Fort Lauderdale, Naples, Fort Myers, and I think the industry is going a different direction now, but all of these manufacturers want you to build these giant Taj Mahal car dealerships.
Yeah.
Because in their minds, you're trying to create reasons for people to want to come in there and hang. I mean, there's dealerships where they have bowling alleys and you can get your hair cut, but like they finally figured out that people never want to go there. They hate going to the dealership where they have to buy a car or get it serviced. But back then, still in the 2000s, mid 2000s, they, in order to grow, and even sometimes even survive, especially in the larger markets, you had to continuously borrow money to build new facilities. And so they got to the point where they were like, we're not going to do this anymore.
We have like the world's largest Subaru dealership down the road from us. And it's like, how did that happen? Right. And it's like, well, we're in New England and they were selling cars. And I guarantee Subaru kept pressing them to grow, right? Like, because they did, or we'll open up a new one and close enough, right? Like,
the worst situation is when you have a manufacturer who's not really making any money. So they see these dealers that are making money and they don't like it. So they're like, hey, you know what, David? I'm going to have you're going to build a new dealership for me. And you say, well, what's in it for me? You know what I mean? Do I get more cars? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to give you more cars. Well, why would I do that?
Right.
I'm the same amount of cash flow, and now I'm going to go borrow a bunch of money to build a new facility. There's no ROI on that.
Right.
It's just, it's a tough business, in that sense. But
I've been the lawyer on a couple of those,
especially the smaller guys who don't really have leverage to say, well, I got 15 dealerships, and
I think the fast food chains are similar, right? I mean, it's like you gotta roll up to a certain size and to really get some of the synergies, right? So if you're not the single operator, it's like, I kind of look at it like get to 10.
Look at the Chick-fil-A model. I mean, most of those people aren't allowed to have more than one. Right? And so they've got almost no leverage.
Right.
But then they don't really, I understand they don't really have equity.
No, they're operators. It's a different component. And I've been really
fascinating.
Yeah. I've really been looking at this as I've been looking at this as a model across a number of different business models, is like, how do we create infrastructure that allows operators that don't want to take the risk of doing things they don't know how to do and build on it? So not really franchises, but similar to what Chick-fil-A's done, because the second you get one Chick-fil-A, like, you're probably making 350, 400 grand a year. So if you think about, well, I was the manager at Wendy's and now I have a Chick-fil-A. Right.
Life's
great,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So and then you hit a cap, and if you're happy, you're happy. And if you're not happy, you're stuck. And that's I think the rub on that particular model. But like, I've looked at a friend of mine and possibly client is the local moms network. And she owns the website, and she owns from the national and the central, she owns the website, she owns the social channels, and it's hyper local marketing, right? Everything a mom needs in a community. But you need someone from the community to actually operate it. And so then there's a revenue split on that. So top line revenue gets split to the local mom, and then there's a kick up to the national that has the infrastructure and owns the infrastructure. And so those models are exceedingly interesting to me, but you end up with not really equity. you end up with an income stream, and it's more a rev share than it is like a equity building component.
If you've got good operators stepping up, with their hand in the air, then
so one of the challenges that we've been looking at is how do we ensure the transition of the operators now that we've proven out the local moms network, the top company owns the assets, and like someone tried, you go through processes and life and things happen, but it's proven now that they own it. It's theirs. They can keep it. They can remove an operator. They can bring in a new one. Yeah. But like, think about that in terms of, well, your operator has a life cycle. Once they're 13, 14, 15, their kid, operating that is much less interesting, right? Mm-hmm. And so now you have to think of the succession of those operators. And you're right. You can go from a top performing, it's not a franchise, but top performing unit to a bottom performing unit based upon who the operator is, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think, again, that's one of those things too. And I suspect you see this in the $10 to $50 million business range of, I'm starting to get beyond where I can control the quality of everything, right? Like there comes a point where the owner loses some of that control. And I would bet that's also a motivating factor in making the sale. Is this kind of got bigger than I want it to be? And,
I think one thing that I see that's a recurring trend amongst owners and businesses that have grown to that level is just a lack of willingness to build a team of people that complement the owner's skill set.
Yeah.
And so, most owners, I did a whole kind of a masterclass presentation with a group last month, and I went through the 3 different types of business owners, and as it's been categorized, one of them we call the tinkerer. So these are generally engineering types. A lot of times they're doctors. They're very good at the product that they created, or in doctors' cases, treating the patients. They're very, very good at it, but they often neglect other aspects of the business because they don't know it or they don't like it.
Yeah, they don't feel comfortable.
They don't feel comfortable, so they just think.
When you're the smartest person at one thing, it's hard to work over here.
Right, and so they don't know what they don't know, and so you see this reluctance to bring in. You think of big businesses, right? They have a C-suite.
Yeah.
A CFO, COO. Now we have a CIO, right? And
you have a CFO,
right? You have all of those things, and you have people that are highly educated and experienced. Well, what do the lower middle market business owners have? Well, what they could have, if they really want to, is to have a team of advisors that they don't have to be on W-2. Yeah. But you've got the right lawyer, you have the right accountant, you have the right M&A advisor, financial advisor, all these people that have experience with business owners, and they can provide you with value and service on an as needed basis, that don't have to be under your roof, but they help you build a business to grow with the end in mind that someday I want to sell it and I want to sell it for maximum value. But a lot of them won't do that. And even worse, what they do is all the good businesses are always going to be getting phone calls and inquiries from buyers. A lot of times private equity has entire rooms of people making phone calls, young associates with, their ties fresh out of Wharton. Right. And so they'll say, well, I got an offer. Why would I
beat those guys?
What's that?
I like to beat those guys.
Yeah. Well, then they got an offer unsolicited and think, well, I can just have my lawyer handle this. And what do I need an advisor for? Right. But you and I both know, how do they know
the valuations, right?
The valuations, right? Because private capital markets are very shrouded in mystery, right?
Yeah, it's not. No, I love the opaqueness.
Yeah. So
there's a way to make a lot of money,
and people thrive there.
Yeah,
absolutely, people thrive. I mean, there's firms like mine that are buy-side advisory firms that advertise it right on their website. Hey, you should hire me because we're going to go out and find businesses that are off market, and we'll get you better deals than businesses that are listed.
Correct.
And it's true. I mean, it's a true statement. So it's shocking to me. I estimate, based on what I've read, roughly half of the businesses in the middle market sell without an advisor. And there's some research out there that's pretty strong that they're leaving a lot of money on the table.
Yeah, I was just
University of Alabama just did a study 2 years ago that came to that conclusion. So,
I have a
So
PhD
anyway.
from University of Alabama.
From Alabama?
From
Really?
University of Alabama Business School. Yeah. Look at that.
Do you say Roll Tide a lot, or
Roll Tide a lot?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so
Bits,
I'm at
Blitz.
UConn for the last since 2012. So mostly go Huskies.
Yeah.
We played them in the Final Four last year.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
I remember that now.
National championship.
In basketball.
Final Four and then national championship against Purdue, which I also attended there. And the previous year we played University of Miami in the Final Four.
Yeah.
And I went to law school at the University of Miami. So,
Man.
you know, we've been destroying, University of Connecticut's been destroying all the schools I went to, in basketball.
Oh, yeah, UConn's no joke.
Yeah.
Men's and women's, right? I mean, strong programs.
Yeah.
So you're doing a lot of NIL stuff now?
I have done a lot of NIL stuff, yeah. And so I look at the player moving forward as the asset class of interest. The team ownership component, that's going to drive down. There's liquidity problems in ownership markets. We're seeing a lot of private equity thinking about, the next tier down, global diversification, all these components. Where I see the growth and the alpha is in the player, in the player brand specifically. And so name, image, and likeness to me allows me to do things that I couldn't do before because of the ridiculous amateurism rules of the NCAA.
When you say you, what do you mean? Acting in what capacity?
Acting as part of the capital stack and part of the operating stack on the future of businesses.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, we have an advisory firm. We have, I got to go take the broker licenses test now. Cause, where we're going with it is also like, large check size, 100, 200, 300 million check size on equity. And so got to be able to collect commission on that, right? Can't leave that on the table.
Yeah.
Compared to the advisory fees, that's a big difference. So, and I think the player, the athlete is a different entity today than it was 20 years ago, where you thought, the player athletes, like they make their money from playing the sport, and then they make a little bit extra from, building spokesperson roles for it. Mm-hmm. Whereas now, if you look at Ryan Reynolds, the actor, he's entirely, most of his wealth comes from his entrepreneurial and private equity operations. He made the beginning of his his capital making movies, and now he makes bigger movies, but he brings that name, image, and likeness and that capital into a business, and it transforms the direction of the business. And so we think, that's where we want to play. Right. Yeah. And so, I've just been building the building blocks of what that would look like long-term. I also think that like name, image, and likeness in college sports right now, the first iteration was basically like handouts from very wealthy people to people that can help win games. Come play here. Now I think we're moving into a world where there's so much value being pushed towards the players that you actually have to create profit centers to drive that payment. And those schools that are better at helping or creating those factors, they will rise to the top over time. The TV contracts, all that stuff, that's just like, Ohio State made $300 million in revenue this year. That's the most, probably of anyone. And so, that's really not going to cut it in big time college sports. It's just not a revenue number that's going to work long term. And so you're going to have to figure out how to get to $500 million to $1 billion pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you have to get way more ruthless on execution, way more creative on revenue, way more creative on assets, and then the monetization of those assets. That's my basic investment thesis.
By assets, you mean players?
No, could be media assets, could be business assets, could be anything really. But things that are monetizable. Like start thinking about it like you're an influencer, like you're an entrepreneur, like you're a business. And so you see that all the time where our activities, so your podcast, all right, you're a advisor, M&A advisor firm, boutique investment bank, but you create a podcast. At some point, if that podcast reaches a certain size, it starts to become significantly monetizable, right? Especially since you're bringing content designed, what I would say, to a high value audience, right? So like there's certain people in the world that will want to reach your audience once you get maybe another order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude bigger, which you'll get to over time, no big deal. But people will want to reach them specifically, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I would suspect you would characterize up your audience as potential business sellers, right? Like people learning, potential business builders, et cetera. And you can kind of say, this is the sweet spot of where their net worth will be. Well, who wants to sell stuff to people with a net worth $30 million, right? Like those people are, that asset that you created, that intellectual property, you could turn it into a book and sell copies of the book. You can turn it into speeches, sell speeches, turn it into that. That's not part of your M&A advisory firm.
Right.
But now you just created assets and IP that allow you to monetize an entirely different way. Imagine a university. Imagine how much IP exists within a university that's never monetized, let alone university athletics. So, you know, that like, when's the last time you saw the coaches would do the coaches radio show, right? That's a low dollar amount that goes directly to a coach. The university could be putting that in contracts that they're doing those shows for the university, right? Coach, who's, you know, whatever your favorite team's coach, their podcast is worth money to the university, as opposed to just fishing it off to a radio show that nobody listens to radio. So, but I mean, as long as you have the old view, you can't really get there. And so that's that sort of stuff. And I think a lot of times these are, most university athletic departments are mid-market companies with major growth potential because of their market notoriety. You know, so that's just my take.
That's something that you're involved with at UConn, trying to.
So I'm sort of that's what I'm doing outside of UConn. Right. Okay. So at UConn, I run an entrepreneurship institute and an innovation hub. So changing the higher ed process. And so along that pathway, I did a lot of proof of concepts that either stuck at UConn or didn't, but we learned a lot about how to change the future of that. And so, you know, working with universities it's not a big surprise to people that the university business model isn't working right now. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just common knowledge, except for at universities. So sometimes it's tough to sell. Hey, your model's broken. We want to help you fix it. But when you find a pain point intense, which NIL has been one of those pain points where we just can't get enough money, most universities, we just can't get enough money to compete at the highest levels. Now you have a chance to do innovation, especially in the business model. And so a lot of times you don't have to change the customer behavior either. All you have to, like, more than just change the channel. So, you know, that's interesting too, because I don't like to build businesses that require a customer to change their behavior. I've made that mistake and I don't want to make that mistake again.
It sounds like there's a lot more there than I even had considered. So
no, I think so for me, there's 2 industries that benefit from the change in name, image, and likeness, and it's the alternative asset industry and youth sports. They're the only 2 that I figured out can get an actual ROI on investments in name, image, and likeness. So, you know, I don't think it's the brands. They may want to be a part of it and try to look cool and get these athletes early, but they're not getting a return on it. Like if you spend $500,000 with whoever the player is, like they're not generating $500,000 revenue, let alone a return on the $500,000. Right? Like the conversion's nowhere there. There's no way. I mean, you have to want to win.
Providing any services other than coming and playing? Are they doing commercials?
Even if they do commercial, but that's what I mean. Even if you're a brand and you come in and put them Bose, right? Bose did a lot of big deals with athletes, and it's like they pay $500,000 for a headphone. You're not selling $500,000 for the headphones off that social ad. You know, it's just not. And so Yeah, it's what it is. I have as we start to wrap this up, I have a really great friend, and I think it overlaps. His name's Andy Goldstrom. He's an advisor for operating businesses, almost like a CEO coach.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this great analogy where he would go and he would run and touch the sign and then run back. That was his morning. Like, he knew he had to make it to the sign. And so when he left, he knew he was going to the sign and coming back. And he took that analogy and put it into the business practice and said, got to know where you're going to go with your business. And people that own businesses, and I think you summed this up earlier, forget what their goal is. And if they want to sell their business, they should be structuring those relationships in a certain way for a longer period of time than, I want to sell my business today. What do I do?
Yeah.
So how do you start to have those conversations? How do you move those conversations up to where you can be really impactful as an advisor on the sale of businesses or on purchasing?
It's hard. I think what happens is you've got to start by asking, what's your exit plan?
Is everyone that owns a business sort of a potential customer for you? Is that when you're out?
I'd say so.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in the way that I do business, I'm never pressuring prospects or clients to work with me. I'm just genuinely a curious person. So I think it works well for me. David, what's your exit plan? And then, let the conversation go from there. And if it's apparent to me that you haven't really done proper planning, then you start asking what I would call the friction questions, asking questions where I know that you don't really have the answer to, or you haven't really thought about. Then you're creating that friction in your mind. You're like, well, maybe I should think about that.
Yeah. I mean, do you think people stay away from it just from fear? How many people are just scared of?
Well, I think it's selling your business is almost like death in a way.
Yeah.
Right. It's like to your point. Yes.
Yeah, that's
yes,
where
I do.
I was trying to get to that. Like, I agree with that. What can you explain why that from your perspective?
I think it's like you said it earlier, their identity is tied up in their business. I mean, and I've heard people try to have conversations with family and loved ones about their will and things like that. And say, I don't want to talk about that. I'm like, you don't want to be on the other side of that where there hasn't been a will or preparations haven't been made and you don't have life insurance or all those things. You have to go through probate. I just think, and I think that people who are very successful business owners in the grand scheme of things, they sort of have an air of invincibility about them.
Yeah, agree.
And
they needed that. They probably needed it.
Yeah, sure. I think it played in their favor. It's like, we all have attributes about us that, have some positive and some negative to it. But I think that it's also a thing where a lot of business owners they're busy with the day to day. And it's kind of like doing your taxes. Do you ever do them early? You never really do them early. You do them in the last possible minute when your accountant's called you for the 15th time. And you don't want to stop having to put out fires on a daily basis to go and say, I want to plan on, selling my business. And that's really part and parcel of the issue. Like Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind, right? Mm-hmm. And so in the three types of business owners, the mountain climber is the one that's always thinking about the end in mind. And they're willing to spend the money to prep the business to sell rather than taking the distribution, right? Yeah. It's not a lifestyle business to them. It's a means to an end. And they're building towards that end, and that's where their sights are set.
I think that's an outstanding point. Is like, if you prepare to sell your business, you will sell it at a higher valuation.
100%.
Period. Right.
100%.
And there comes a point
you'll stand out too in a big way.
Really? Yeah. To the buyers.
Yeah. I mean, 80% of businesses that go to market don't sell.
Really?
Go to Biz Buy Sell and take a screenshot and go back in 6 months from now, it'll be the same businesses on there because the really good ones go like that. I mean, I sold a business 2 years ago. I don't list them publicly very often, but sometimes it's apropos. I put a very, very, I would say 8.5 out of 10 run plumbing business. And as you probably know, the trades are selling really well. The guy that bought that business, he had the NDA signed within 30 minutes of me putting it online.
Wow.
He was on it and nobody else ever really had a chance. So The rest of that stuff is just, riffraff on there. So if you've truly planned and you prepare your business to sell, you're going to stand out, and buyers are going to know it right away.
Yeah. And a buyer can pay a premium because they feel comfortable.
Yeah. I mean, even a half a turn is a premium, right? But, most of the time, David, you can just go to these people's websites
and see it
and see it's garbage.
Yeah.
Or the other way around. You know what I mean? That's the window to your soul. It's like, would you go on a first date with a highly attractive woman and not comb your hair or brush your teeth? It's like, it's an easy thing to do. Well, websites, $3,000. You know what I mean? Why would you not have that looking high and tight? But some people just think, well, the website doesn't bring me money, so I'm not going to fix it. Yeah. In their mind, that's how they,
And so everything in their business is going to be drawn up in that way.
Yeah, I'm not going to paint the walls because it doesn't bring me money. Well, maybe not, but a buyer walks through there, they're going to get an impression.
Yeah.
By everything, right?
Yeah. No. One last question. We talked a little bit about the owner's death and sort of feeling that. But one of the areas, so my family's been in the funeral business since the 30s. And one of the things I think about in that turn is what kind of value is lost when the owner doesn't prepare to sell the firm and then passes on before, and the family's left with a fire sale, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of my work is, highly confidential in nature. I have lots of stories, but I will say there's a great documentary on, I think it's Netflix, called The Blue Zones. Have you seen that?
No.
It's all the areas in the world where people have lived past 100 in the highest concentrations, right? And there seems to be, one's in Italy, one's in inland California, one's in Japan, and one's in Costa Rica. And the documentary, they go all the way around and visit these cultures. And one of them, I think it's in Italy, it's in like the Tuscany region of Italy. And they talk about family and how they preserve family, and specifically the elderly. There is no nursing homes there.
Right.
And they told sort of a fable about some mythical town where they used to take the old people up to the top of the cliff at some certain specific age, like 70, and shove them off, and that was it. And years later, there's a man that became very successful in town, and he had accumulated all this wealth. And somebody asked him one day, like, "What? Basically, how did you get all this wealth?" And he's basically like, "I didn't push my dad off the cliff. Like, I kept him in my, and I'm not doing the story service, but like he hoarded his own and hid his own parent." And that knowledge and that wisdom was worth so much, even though physically they couldn't, produce or they couldn't contribute anymore. And so in this particular town in Italy, all of the elderly, they live at home with their family. And it's, they talk about the value that they bring from their experience alone, and how much that adds to their lives and their wealth, so to speak. And so, you lose that. That intellectual capital, it can be extremely disruptive, especially if you don't have an owner that did a great job of, cultivating talent and delegating and, building a strong management team.
I just think you could run a $10 million business and nobody know how to run it besides you easily.
Yeah.
And you could structure it that way. And you mentioned it. It's one of the fatal flaws, right? And if you do that, and then something happens to you, your family is left in a really precarious spot.
The most successful people I see are people that are just, they're great with people. They know how to treat their employees, they know how to treat their customers, and they just have a way about them that
I love working with people that know how to treat their employees well. It's there's something to it that like you can't get in other people.
One of my clients on the real estate side, because historically we've done a lot of investment grade real estate, is City Furniture, and they're a second generation business. And actually they were one of my first guests, Andrew and Keith Koenig, father, son. And Keith started the business with his brother, who's no longer with us, but they were Waterbed City originally. Right. They sold waterbeds. That was it. And so Andrew worked his way up from the loading docks, working the midnight shift. Like, he rolled his sleeves up and did all the hard work. He didn't just walk in there and get a corner office. And so now that as this, the second gen CEO, he's brought a lot of ideas. He spent a lot of time in Japan learning total quality management and that stuff. And I'm wrapping this up, but they treat their people so phenomenally well. It resonates, like, it emanates from them.
Yeah.
And you can you walk in there and you can just tell there's a culture where people are treated well and respected. But you take it a step further, it blew my mind. He posts a lot on social media, but they have a vendor appreciation day once a year where they bring all of their top vendors in and they have a workshop and they treat them and they eat and they drink and they share ideas. And so I saw Andrew about a week after I saw his post on that. I said, Andrew, that blew my mind. You look at companies like Walmart and Disney who are notorious for treating their vendors horribly, like commodities, really, at best.
If you don't want to do it, we got a Chinese one that can.
He goes, Wes, I got so many great ideas from that vendor appreciation day. I'm so psyched about it. I'm like, how neat is that? You treat people well, and it comes back to you.
Yeah.
In the form of value and wealth and intellectual capital and all those things. And I'm like, can that be part of like where we go in this world going forward? I mean, I just love that.
People have to choose that as the pathway, right? I mean, I love to see that. It becomes very easy to work with them. They're going to treat you well when shit hits the fan, right? It's like, it's those little signals. It's the little pieces. And I think if I were building a business to be sold, that's where you invest in is all the pieces that allow. And that's why that question, have you built the foundation or are you in growth? Where are you at? Like you have to build a foundation to build something great on top of it. Otherwise it's impossible in my opinion.
No, it's building your house on stone and not sand. Right. And so,
exactly.
The word is invest.
Yeah.
Right. You're investing in good people. Sometimes that's going to cost you more money, but if you're really serious about growing a business, that's the cost of doing business, right?
I agree. Well, thank you very much, Wes. Enjoyed the conversation, and it's a little different than the one from Dollar Bill, but that's the range, right? I think the idea is there's a whole set of things. The people in the world that create things are really phenomenally interesting to me. And I think the people that help people create things often get missed as well. So thank you for coming in and sharing.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
All right.